From the very beginning, leader of the Liberty and Justice Party, Lenox Shuman, has made it very clear that he will not be politically aligned. As the son of an Arawak chief, he has always challenged the status quo and pledges that his party intends to defend and protect all Guyanese. Lenox Shuman's journey has been a long one, from growing up in the 70s under hardships as he described to the Guyanese Diaspora News under the Burnham regime, to being a best-performing student which allowed him a scholarship to study in Georgetown, which was met with outright discrimination because of his ancestry, to living abroad and now a remigrant working tirelessly to effect change. Shuman is someone who is deeply connected to the people, all the people, and intends to use his platform to ensure that he makes a difference in the next 5 years as the first Indigenous Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Tell us, first of all, what was your main reason for getting into politics?
It was birthed out of necessity. At least when we looked at Indigenous people's issues, when I was part of the National Two Shows Council, I was the vice chairman of the NPC. And we had looked at issues that still continue to persist 206 years later, beyond when Guyana was given to the Brits by the Dutch. We are 206 years and we have not addressed our land titling. In fact, in 2017, the APNU AFC government took back a title just by gazetting one of our communities, an area, as an NDC. That, amongst a variety of things, the shortcomings in satisfying what the Constitution mandates, the blatant racism in policy and policy formulation, the coastal drift, the lack of education, economic activity. As 10% of the population, we have to have a say in our futures. So we ventured in, at least I ventured into politics, not individually, but with a group of people who were frustrated with the system. And I want to say that just by being present, by being on the platform, we have seen already a monumental shift in how they intend on approaching Indigenous peoples. And had we not done that, I think it might have just been status quo or back to status quo.
Of your being leader of your Liberty and Justice Party, what is first and foremost your agenda as being a member of Parliament and representing your people?
One of the things that was high on our agenda, and I think we may have to take a little bit of a shift in that in light of COVID, was for constitutional reform to take the fore. Because I think that once we get some components, I can't say that we have a perfect formula. I don't think that any political party has a perfect formula, but I would like to see constitutional reform being placed on the agenda and being pursued aggressively. Obviously, we would have gone through the COVID and providing relief for the people in light of the environment right now. But I also want to see that the Constitution of Guyana, even in its revision, is respected. We had two political parties that sat in breach of the Constitution for over 20 years. That is the APNU AFC and the PPP. They sat in breach of the Constitution where it says that no dual citizen can sit in Parliament. But yet they simply accepted it and moved on. How do you have constitutional violators continue to occupy office? And yet nothing happened. So there must be a greater emphasis placed on constitutional compliance. And where there is no compliance, there needs to be some charges. You can't violate the Constitution and then nothing happens. Look at what happened for the last 5 months in Guyana, and Granger kept saying that, or Mr. Granger kept saying that, I obey the Constitution, I obey the court rulings, but yet he did quite the opposite. So there must be some consequence for when you violate something. It can't just be, well, we'll go to the court will provide guidance, and then nothing happens. If that is the case, then who is to stop anyone from violating the Constitution, and then nothing happens?
So one of the main things what we've seen throughout the few months that went by, the long 5 months and so forth, from the very first time when you entered the court and so forth, in your native attire, What's the main reason behind that dress that you wear in the National Assembly?
If you look at the cultural makeup of Guyana, we call this land of six races. I prefer something different, maybe a land of six nations or six peoples, right? Because just by identifying race, we have already identified one main component of our problem nationally. And there is only one group in this country that has to de-identify before they're accepted in society. Excuse me. And that group is the indigenous grouping. Basically, we have to leave our language behind and speak only English. We have to leave our culture behind. We are not permitted to practice our culture, at least not within the Georgetown settings or setting without being looked at with some degree of scorn. We seldom ever participate at the national level in food programs that where our traditional food, even to that, we can't even have access to it on the coast. When you look at what happened, Guyana has been dominated by an Indo and Afrocentric parties, but yet the first people we've never had a say in the national affairs of this country. So when we were going through this entire process in that long and tedious and very exhausting 5 months, it was meant to highlight that Guyana is not only about blacks and Indians, that the indigenous peoples, the first peoples of this country, need to have a say in what happens in Guyana.
So
And
basically, sorry.
by by ensuring that our people understand that you do not have to de-identify, you don't have to be ashamed or afraid to step forward and say, look, this is what we would like, and this is who I am, and this is how we intend on showing our presence and ensuring we're not left out. When I walked into court in my traditional attire, I was the only indigenous person in there. And many indigenous people said, look at this. We've got blacks and Indians fighting for our country and we're not doing anything about it. Are we to simply sit by and watch? But they're also very afraid because of how society looks down on them. Me, let society come. I'll face it head on.
So Lennox, you're telling me this is a cry for representation.
I wouldn't say it's a cry. I'd say it's a demand. Had I not been, and I think I would like to suspect very arrogantly of me to say it, but I'd like to suspect that had I not been part of this grouping that fought for democracy, we might have seen a different political dispensation in Guyana. That the PNC would have just walked over the country. We would have had a different political formulation, maybe sat in a dictatorship. Had I not been on stage, and I will say that without apology.
And even now, when you sit in parliament, you often sit alone on those benches because the other members of the opposition would have walked out. How do you feel about that?
There is a bit of political gamesmanship that happens on both sides of the house, but at the end of the day, the taxpayers are paying me to go into parliament. They're paying me to represent them. They're paying me to sit there, and if I have to debate, I will debate. If I have to discuss, I will discuss. If I have to go and shake hands and ensure that, the things that are meant to be done for the people are done, then that is what I will do. But I think it is irresponsible of me, as someone being paid by the taxpayers, to just walk out of parliament. I think it is very irresponsible of me. Thus, I have a responsibility to the people. I intend on ensuring that they get their money's worth in representation in Parliament. It is as simple as that. I find it very difficult at times to sit with people who wanted to rig the elections. You've got the governing People's Progressive Party, Civic, who won the elections. People seem to think or tend to think in the back of their minds that we fought for the PPP. We did not fight for the PPP. We fought for people's franchise to be respected. We fought for democracy to be maintained. And that it's as simple as that. So we did not really fight for the PPP, we fought for the people and to ensure that their franchise got respected. So yes, at times it can be a bit uncomfortable, especially with the remarks that are being thrown my way from people in the opposition.
So, Lennox, as a member of parliament, one of the reasons why the other members, they walk out and, they feel that because obviously the ruling party has the majority, that even if they're there, that their voice will not be heard, their input will not be, represented. Is that a true reflection of the parliament right now?
I think to a certain extent, yes. But the one thing that needs to be underscored is that while they were in office, they had ample opportunity to change the system. And when the system now comes back and starts backfiring on them, then they're trying to cry foul. You cannot sit there and have an opportunity to change a system, and when you go on the other side and it's no longer working for you, then you're going to cry foul. That's precisely what they're doing. And I don't support that at all. When we have an opportunity, we're given an opportunity to implement positive change. We need to take that opportunity because when we get on the other side, the system has to be fair. We cannot allow a lopsided system to continue. And that is why constitutional reform needs to be one of the front things on the agenda.
You're on the ground a lot, speaking to people in the communities. What are, besides those few that you highlighted, what are some of their major concerns about Guyana?
The majority of it is equity. Everyone wants a piece of the pie of Guyana, and everyone wants to ensure that they're not left out of this big formula. That is the reality on the ground. When you talk to people in these communities, they say, "Look, why is it that the coast is getting this? How can I get this? How, right?" Everyone wants to ensure that they get their fair share of what is Guyana. Guyana cannot only go to the rich and the super rich where they take up all of these massive lands and all these things, where they get all of the juicy contracts and then all they get are the scraps from the end of the table. Everyone wants to ensure that they get their equitable piece. And right now, I don't know if that is the direction it's going. It's too early for me to evaluate, but I will say that I don't too like the indicators so far. We're hopeful that there may be some shift. That what the government is trying to do right now is to get things on track, but we're hopeful that there is a shift where it becomes a lot more poor centric.
So, what indicators specifically you're talking about that you're currently dissatisfied with?
Let's take a look at the oil and gas industry, for example, one of the larger ones. You tell me of how many people that are south of the coast would have benefited from that. And you name me the families who are south of the coast who would have benefited from that. You will not find it because we all know that the larger, richer families in Guyana can afford to do the things that are necessary to get into the oil and gas industry. If you look at where rice and sugar is produced, it's produced on the coast. And that is where a lot of the money seems to be housed. So if they wanted to buy half of Guyana to the south, then they could simply earn their money on the coast and use that money to buy half of Guyana to the south. And that's the reality. So it's not very poor centric.
So, Lennox, so far the government hasn't reached 100 days as yet. But from what you're telling me today, it seems as though you're not completely 100% satisfied with the progress so far. Is that what you're saying? That there is still a lot of concerns and things that are happening that you're not pleased with?
I would say it's a mixed bag at this point. I'm sitting down evaluating and watching what's happening. Um, I can't say that I have a good or a strong enough marker to say that this is the direction that they are going. What I see is a lot of things coming in. I don't know that the public is being told in very concise and direct terms where all of these things are going to be coming from and who's getting what. So it's very interesting. And like I said, I am right now sitting down watching and give it another. We remember we just came out of budget debates. We went through the estimates and then, you know, pretty much the implementation of budget and all that stuff. So I'm going to sit down and wait and give it up to Christmas and see what kind of evaluation um, can be done, and then decide from there how we're going to approach the next 4 years.
So even with these concerns that you have right now, though preliminary, as you said, you're going to wait until Christmas. How would you go about to address these concerns to see if you, because you're a member of parliament, you're part of the legislature. How will you address these concerns that you have to ensure that some effect change?
As a member of parliament, I have to sit down and talk with the administration and find out what strategic direction they're going. And I'm not trying to find out, I will be very clear. I don't want to find out your game so that I could undermine you. I want to find out your game so that I know how I could support it be, and if I don't think that it is strong enough, that I could contribute to making it strong enough. That is the way I look at Guyana. It is not politics real as, or classic politics in that sense. I'm not a politician to that extent. I'm here for the people of Guyana. I've always worked for the people of Guyana since I came back. And at the end of the day, if I see that there is a direction that the government is not going that I feel that they could do different, then I will obviously have to have that dialogue with them. But I don't jump from zero to fight right off the bat. You must permit dialogue to take place. And if that dialogue falls on deaf ears, then we obviously have to rethink our strategy going forward. But it becomes difficult now to go from where we are and say 5 years down the road that you didn't do this, you didn't do whatever, when I had ample opportunity to talk to the decision makers and say, look, these are the things that I'd like you to do. And if, help along. And if there are shortcomings, like I said, find ways to address it. I strongly believe in dialogue.
Have you had any meetings or any concerns expressed by communities where the railway? I mean, probably it's a little premature or early for us to be talking about this, but I'm not sure what's happening on the ground. But maybe perhaps people are already expressing concerns or just talking about the whole fact that this railway will pass through indigenous lands. And what are their concerns? Because I know the conservation is there. I mean, people in those communities, they hold on to their culture, guard it very closely. And, I'm not sure, we all we want Guyana to develop, but at the same time, we want to preserve our culture and we want to have that, some sort of, have that balance happen. How do you see that going forward, and what is the discussion on the ground?
Well, that is the active word that you use there, balance. Many communities are looking for a balance. But I will tell you that those conversations have not started in many communities because of the ordeal that we went through for the last 5 months. And I'd say even for the last 5 years, many communities struggle to make ends meet. And right now, we are not at that level yet to start that conversation because many of those communities are sitting there and saying, look, I'm hungry. Don't tell me about road, don't tell me about railway, don't tell me about planes and airports. I want to know how I'm going to A, put food in my belly, and B, put a roof over my head. Maslow's tiers 1 and 2. And until we could satisfy those two, then the communities are not going to sit there and say, well, let's talk about rail, let's talk about airplanes, let's talk about boats and all those things. What they want to know is how am I going to benefit so that my family is not going to starve. When that is done, I want to know how I'm going to get a roof over my head. When that is done, I want to know how my child will be educated. I want to know how I'm going to get health care. Those are some of the fundamental questions that communities are asking. There are also articles in the Constitution that we need to give life to. Let's deal with the indigenous component, for example, Article 149G. No one has ever developed a policy that gives life to that article. There is also the Human Rights Commission that was never formed. And there are a variety of things in the Constitution that literally people and administrations simply they just watch them drift by. Article 149(2) of the Constitution talks about living in a society that is free from discrimination. Yet when you go into public buildings, you're only catering for the people who have two hands and two legs. We don't have any public building that is wheelchair accessible. When some people walk into public buildings, you force them to change the way they dress. What if that is the only thing that they can afford? Are you saying that they cannot access government services? If I want to go and report a matter to the police station and I am wearing just an armless, they say you can't come in here. Well, what if I'm a victim of a crime? Are you telling me that because I cannot afford a shirt that I cannot come and report my matter? So all of these things, and those are things that literally, um, what I say, subtracts from the richness that Guyana can be or could be. We see vehicles running red lights and running stop signs, double laning in a single lane, almost running people over, and so in some cases people get ran over, and nothing happens. So we have to literally find a way to not only enforce the Constitution as it is, but enforce the laws of Guyana. And I'm hopeful that some of those things can be addressed. We wanted to look at educational reform. We wanted to look at legislative reform. Quite a lot of reform. Um, it's a very broad agenda. So we're not looking at getting all this accomplished in a month or two. This is a 5-year term,
Right.
and we sit with our partners in the joiner to see how we could achieve that.
Well, Lennox, you're doing a great job, and I think your contribution is highly valuable because based on what you've shared with me today, I think you have great insight and knowledge as to where you would like to see the country, and I believe your input is very valuable because you're thinking for the people and looking to see exactly how all the people can benefit, and making sure that there is equitable distribution of wealth as you talked about. So I want to wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. And I want you to know that you're always welcome on this program so that we can discuss going forward. It's going to be an interesting 5 years, as you said. And we want to make sure that we hold our government accountable as well as, while they're implementing these programs, everybody's looking forward, for a positive growth and so forth. At the same time, we want to make sure that, whatever concerns are also addressed.